Hi everybody, welcome to the 9th devlog. Today we're going to be talking about the Sultan's palace scene. So this week I've been focusing on finalizing that one scene because I left it unfinished in the early access game. If anybody remembers, I cut the game off at a certain point inside the secret lair. That's because the other half of the chapter was just unfinished. Basically, as I said in the last video, there's gonna be massive spoilers on how to solve the puzzles because it's going to be a very puzzle oriented level. There won't be a debugging section in this video because I was literally just focused on this and trying to make this map look as good as possible. This is what the map is about, right? So you're at the very final level in the game. Your best friend has literally just been kidnapped by your uncle and his cat cult, and now you're just, oh god, I have to get to the very top of the roof, which is where they are. What are they gonna do to my best friend? Oh no. I decided to make this palace abandoned because I wanted to make it very loosely historically inspired. Around the early 1900s, there was no sultan or anything anymore in the Ottoman Empire, so I wanted to impart this feeling of abandonment of old traditions, maybe symbolize the emptiness of this previously grand and wonderful lifestyle. Firstly, when I opened up that map scene in Unity, I was already disappointed and I decided, okay, we need to completely redraw the map. We need to do something really pretty with this because it's like a palace after all, right? My biggest issue with that old design was that it was really tightly packed and it was really small for a palace, and also it was just confusing to navigate through. I don't know, just the layout of it was really weird and I didn't like it. So I decided to make the environment much bigger and stick to a couple of colors instead of a bunch of colors. Again, the colors don't represent the colors used in the palaces in the Ottoman Empire, but again, I'm not trying to make it historically accurate. I just wanted to borrow aspects of it to inspire myself and not think too much about what's going on in the background of the story. Anyway, I yapped way too much. This is the old design. This is the new design. I still need to add little decorations here and there and make the whole palace a lot more full looking. I'm really glad that I changed the design to this new design because I'm just much happier with it. So yeah, there's that. Another neat thing I did with the designing of the map was I didn't leave it up to fully hand-drawn work. I also used these things called splines. I'm sure you guys have heard of it, but most of us maybe know how to use splines for animation purposes, but you can also use splines for creating bends and loops and stuff with your sprites, and it's just very clean looking and easy to use. I think you can download that package. I think it's called 2D Sprite something. I'll put it up on the screen right now. Alright, let's move on to actually creating the puzzles. So when I was redesigning the map, I also took into account the mobility of the cat. So basically what I did was you go through the castle entrance and you're met with this big statue of a lion. This lion blocks off the entrance to the rest of the castle, right? And that little segment of land can already be used to teach the player about what's going to go on generally throughout the whole map. So this is what happens, right? This is the first puzzle that you're supposed to go through. So you have to walk through the flower garden to pick a flower using your music and give it to the lion as a thank you. Basically, you give the lion the flower and then it moves out of the way for you and lets you walk through the rest of the map. But the way this whole puzzle works is that you have to walk through all of the flowers and you have to be very attentive because one of the flowers will output a code basically for you to input that with your music using your duduk. But the thing is, you have to be very careful because the moment you step away from that flower, it's going to remove that code from your view. The code is going to be shuffled to a completely new code and a completely random flower is going to be picked from that little segment of ground. So just to explain it one more time, just so it's extra clear, there's a bunch of different flowers and you have to walk through all of them, and each time you walk through a flower, a new flower is picked from this array of flowers. If you accidentally happen to walk into one of the flowers, it will output the code, but if you walk too fast or you're not careful enough and you don't stop in time, then that code will be removed from view. It will reshuffle all over again, so you cannot memorize the code and just input it whenever you want, and it will be sent to a completely other random flower in the array. So hopefully that makes sense. I don't know, I tested it myself and it was kind of fun. I'll explain the code in greater detail once I explain all of the puzzles, but yeah. So the second puzzle is you walk into the palace entrance and everything once you've passed through the lion's gatekeeping or whatever, and at some point inside of the palace you see a treasure chest, and that treasure chest has 3 different holes, and so it's clear that you have to add some sort of hole in there to unlock a key. And why do you want to unlock a key? Because in order to get to the very roof of the Sultan's palace, you need to use that key to unlock that exit door. So yeah, that is your main goal, to find that key so you can get to the roof of the palace. Now, how do you get those 3 little things to unlock the treasure chest, those 3 little key fragments? At some point you spot 3 massive cats, and they're all complaining and they all want something from you. And once you give that something to them, they will give you the key. It's a very simple puzzle layout. The first cat asks for, I'm reading off of my notes like I haven't been spending the past 48 hours working on this, but so the first cat asks you for a ball of yarn, so you have to find that ball of yarn basically. Once you find it, you see that a bird is trying to hide it away from you, and that bird's like, oh, I saw what you did with that lion. Why don't you give me something too? And it tells you, get it the same way that you got that flower for the lion. So hopefully that's enough cue to the player to look through the garden. Maybe it's not as clear actually, but yeah, something to think about. This is another problem that I am thinking about. In the last puzzle, you had about 13 flowers to shuffle through. In this puzzle, it's more like 40 flowers, if I remember correctly. And I don't know if that's going to be really frustrating and tiring to the player at some point, but it's worth testing out with a couple of people first. Yeah, it's the exact same mechanic as the one with the lion again, just... Oh yeah, I forgot. Except there's one other thing I'm adding into that puzzle. You have to be very, very quick. Once you accidentally enter into this chosen flowers collider, you have literally 1 second to look at the code before it disappears. It doesn't matter if you leave the collider anymore. You literally only have 1 second. And then you input it into that flower and then it gives you something. I don't know, maybe it's a bit too evil. I'll test it out with my friends and see what they think. So yeah, and then you give the apple to the bird, and then the bird gives you the yarn. You give the yarn to the cat, and haha, you have your first key fragment. Okay, moving on to the second cat. That cat wants you to give it catnip. How'd you do that? You find this box of catnip somewhere in the palace. You have to go and find this special plot of land where you can put those seeds in the ground, and then you have to use your music to grow those seeds really quickly, because just waiting all day for it is going to take way too long, and who knows what might happen to your best friend before then. Eventually you grow the catnip, you give it to the second cat, there's your third key fragment. And the very final cat just wants you to give it a fish because it's hungry. Can you blame that cat? No. But this is the thing. Once you find that fish somewhere in the palace, a massive dragon comes out and wants to eat you. And that's where you enter battle with it. I don't know, I haven't thought up this last step way too much because I haven't done the battle mechanic yet. And then you've collected all the key fragments and now you can go unlock everything. Yeah, and then you make your way up to the roof and you find your best friend and who knows what happens after that. Okay, so I've explained all of the puzzles. Now what? Oh yeah, so now I'm going to explain the coding. So some very minor things that I did along the way was for inventory that cannot be used in the current environment that you're in, I made sure to add an error message that says that you can't use this item right now. Are you kidding me? So yeah, there's that. I also made the little text bubbles that NPCs tell you a little bit prettier by drawing this little comic style, how do you call it? Text bubble, whatever, I don't remember, but I think it looks much prettier this way. Besides that, I added a lot of inventory for the puzzles. As you would know, I described a lot of different props that are involved with the puzzles, so I coded all of those, and basically the average anatomy of an inventory item, I guess, is they have 3 or 4 things attached to it. Okay, so you obviously need this inventory item script that basically just checks that whether if the cat is inside the trigger zone, then it can pick it up. If not, then it cannot pick it up. like basic as that. And then if it is picked up, it's added into the inventory in the sub menu. That's the inventory item script. Then it needs to have a player input component attached to it, of course, because I'm using the new input system now. And it also has an item GUID, GUID, so that, again, because Unity doesn't persist this sort of stuff, you need to keep track of it yourself. If you don't want to use the don't destroy on load method that Unity offers you, please don't be mad at me. I have a static class with a bunch of little static bools that you can access from everywhere, and they basically are in charge of letting you know when you can and when you can't use the inventory. And basically how I do that is I take, for example, with that little flower you're supposed to give the lion, I have a separate bool that like checks when you can and cannot use the flower in your inventory. It's changed to true or false depending on whether you're in that lion's collider. If you guys have a better way of handling that sort of stuff, please let me know in the comments. Thank you. Okay, past that, when you use the inventory next to this character, something needs to be triggered right after that, right? So basically, I have another script which I think I have talked about in my decoupling code video. There's one class I have called inventory handler, which one of the buttons in the inventory is clicked, then its string is fed into this class. And it has just one method, which is a massive switch statement. Depending on the string, it handles that inventory. For example, once this inventory is clicked and it's totally okay to use it in this segment of the world, then it invokes this one action that says that this thing was pressed. And that feeds back to, for example, the lion game object, which has this one method called react. It'll just move out the way and then destroy itself because we don't need that lion anymore at all. Okay, now let's talk about the interesting stuff that I did. Okay, so the random flowers logic, the first two puzzles that I was talking about. How did I do that? I already kind of explained it, but let me get a little bit more in depth. Basically, I had two scripts for that. There was one script called random flowers and another one called SP flowers, I think. SP standing for Sultan's Palace. So random flowers was attached to this empty game object which took track of all the flowers, and it held like all the array of all of the flowers and stuff. It held this one empty game object which stands for the chosen flower in the array. What else? I also had a game object which took care of this code game object, which stored 4 different sprites inside of it, which would be these 4 different slots for the code you're supposed to input. And I also had an integer called start range and end range, which was supposed to stand for which bundle of flowers are we supposed to select in this certain problem. So I introduced that when I realized that the first half of the game where the lion was and the second half, which is like after the lion, they should be handled separately. Let me explain it a bit better. The first half of the puzzle was for finding the flower and giving it to the lion, and the second half of the puzzle / garden is where you find that apple for the bird. It would be really awkward to go back and forth between this like gated area where it's quite obvious that the two places should be separated. The first place should act like a tutorial for what's gonna come next, and the second place is where the actual frustration and toil begins. So yeah, and then in that line of code after that, we picked the chosen flower from the array of flowers, and then we moved the code game object to that flower, but just a bit above it, and then it returns the value. And then there's the randomized code method, which returns a string. So first we have the string index, which is the array of characters that are within the duduk. And then we have duduk code, which is just this empty string that we're supposed to fill up later when we randomly generate the characters. So yes, as you can see, for each code slot, which there are 4 of them, for each of those, we generate this random value from 0 to 7 because that's the index string is 8 characters long. And then we get the sprite renderer. And then since I assigned a sprite for every single letter, obviously so the player can see what they're supposed to be inputting, you pick that for each single slot, and then you increment the number of characters inside the duduk code. So then you can pass it to the scriptable object, which handles whether or not you inputted that code correctly. If you'd like to know more about that, I talked about that in the code decoupling video, I think. And then past that, we have SP flowers. Let me find that. This script carries our flower, which we're supposed to hand over to the lion. It takes reference to random flowers, and it also has an ID and wait time. So since I am attaching this SP flower script to every single flower in the game, they're going to be fighting for attention. So I assigned all of them a separate ID. Each flower has a trigger box. When you enter that trigger box and the ID of that flower matches, then it will subscribe to the event in which you have inputted the code correctly, and now you deserve to have that flower. It will also set the code in that scriptable object, so then it obviously has something to compare your inputted code to. And then give thing basically says that, okay, now we've given you the flower and we've like transported it right next to that flower in which you inputted the code, and we've also unsubscribed from the event, which is very important. Don't forget to do that at some point in your code. That's that logic. It worked so perfectly and amazingly, but it's a completely different story for the second thing I wanted to code, which was the catnip growing mechanic. I was thinking for a while on how to make this mechanic fun, and I decided that maybe it would be nice to just make it like a whack-a-mole game. This is the way I constructed everything. So basically there's this one little area which you're supposed to be standing to play the game, and then I have 5 different boxes for the catnip and 5 different boxes for the little characters that are supposed to pop up that you have to press on your keyboard on time. And then code-wise, this is what I did. I have the model view controller for every single bundle of objects. What I'm trying to say by that is I have the controller and the model tied to the character objects, and I have the view tied to the catnip, so that every time you input the code correctly, the catnip is supposed to grow a little, in theory. And then since there's a bunch of little model view controllers, I wanted to add one big master controller over the other controllers so that it makes sure to start and end the game responsibly. Because I want to randomize when the characters pop up and pop down, I have a random range from 0 to 3, which represents waiting from 0 to 3 seconds plus another 2 seconds, because the animation of the character popping up and down is 2 seconds in total. So end game basically checks whether or not the game should be stopped by having a counter in check, and when the counter is past the number 2, that means that the catnip has fully grown. That's basically the logic of it, but here's the issue. I thought it worked fine. The whole like popping up and down thing worked fine. This is the thing though. There needs to be another way that we handle the way the characters are fed into the duduk tool script. Basically, because like buttons are popping up all of the time, that variable is constantly reset, and it could be like milliseconds before the next button pops up. So you might be inputting the correct code, but that code will already be outdated by the logic of the game that I wrote already. And I don't know, this is a new mechanic for me, so I need to like find a new way to handle it, because otherwise the logic that I wrote worked with everything else. I don't know, I'll play around with that and see what it is like, because otherwise I really like the idea I have for this little mini game. But besides that, again, there's a bunch that still needs to be added to this scene. I have some very interesting little visual effects that I want to add when I work on the lighting in the game, so stay tuned for that. Besides that, there's a bunch to be polishing in the game overall. Like, we haven't even gotten to the achievements yet. What else is there? I mean, I have to fix the inventory logic. There's just a bunch of stuff in this scene I haven't worked on. So yeah, that's all happening in the near future. Stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching. And once again, if you have any comments, feedback, anything, please write it in the comments. Join our Discord server if you would like to, which is in the link in my channel, along with a lot of other links. That's it for today. Thanks for watching again, and have a great start of your week. Mwah.